Well, welcome to Uplifting Humans, where we honor, empower, educate, and inspire the listener. I'm Cylindrin Buller, your host. Our guest today is Adrienne White, a trusted advisor, speaker, and coach who brings a genuine passion for advancing the potential and well-being of women around the world. Welcome, Adrienne.
Thank you so much, Cylindrin. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, it's an honor and a privilege. We've been trying to connect, and it's kind of nice that we've been able to take some time out to share your knowledge and understanding. It's going to be a great next little while here. I want to know, Adrienne, you are known as the brain geek who understands neuroscience and have told me that you have had to reinvent yourself several times. Can you share a little bit more about that with us today?
Sure, yeah. There have been a few opportunities for me to completely restart, as you said, but one of them came as a result of burnout, colossal burnout. And I know that's something, that a lot of people experience. I'd actually had it twice before, but the third time that I experienced burnout, whoa, I was physically and mentally exhausted. I couldn't think, I couldn't concentrate. At the end of it all, I actually lost my job. And the freaky thing is, when you have that kind of burnout, there's nothing doctors can do. So it really scared me. And
wouldn't there be like telltale signs prior to leading up to that, Adrienne? Wouldn't there be something?
Sure. Yes. Okay. I've got to tell you something about me. I'm a recovering control freak. I've
Love
so
it.
I'm, a sprinkle of perfectionism, very much type A. I've softened now. I'm an A minus, but with a very strong work ethic, you want to get the job done. So I became very skilled at explaining away. A lot of people do this, explaining away the symptoms. So the symptoms were like, okay, that physical and mental exhaustion, right? You start to feel more and more tired and you think, I just need a good sleep. Difficulty concentrating, right? That's really tough too. That brain fog. And something we all do at some point, we forget words, right?
Yes.
But I'm starting to forget a lot of words, and they call that aphasia. And also, I couldn't concentrate, I couldn't focus. And, all the stuff that I was hired to do, pretty much, I couldn't do. And it was scary, to be honest with you.
Now, you've been through that, like you said, 3 times. Each time, were the symptoms different, or were they the same that you knew, uh-oh, there it is again, or you just discounted and waved your wand at it and said, it's just nothing?
Well, the truth is, the first 2 were not as bad as the third. So I don't know if it's cumulative, but yeah, I really wanted things to be right. And I cared so deeply about the people that I worked with that if the company was making a decision that I didn't think was the best choice, learning material, for example, I would jump in and do it on my own time. Like stupid.
Oh my.
not the best choice, right?
But you came from the right place. I honestly feel that you probably came from the right place. You came from the heart. You really cared. You probably had some passion and drive because you cared enough. But I think that, that's a control thing too.
But you're right. It did come from the right place. No question. And that touches on something I'm hoping we're going to talk on a little bit later.
Okay.
Around listening to yourself and self-care and that kind of thing.
Right, right.
But yeah, so that burnout, it had good and bad things. Can I tell you about that?
Yes, yes, please.
Well, the good thing that came out of it is I really deepened into my learning about neuroscience because, as you've said, and it's true, I'm a brain geek. I am utterly fascinated by the brain, and it's been part of my work for decades in terms
Mm,
of how adults learn and how people embrace change or don't, right? So the brain and leadership, those are all things that I'm steeped in and that I geek out on. But in this case, one of the real benefits that came from that burnout is I developed a 5-step program for dealing with burnout and stress and really busting through it, right? A breakthrough system. And that was a great thing to have. And it's certainly benefiting my clients. But
yes,
the bigger gift came a while longer. I mentioned I couldn't work,
yes.
and I lost my job. So I had a window of opportunity. And, the universe really is good. And what came my way was a workshop
Mhm.
that was focused on the feminine. And I thought, meh, this sounds like it's going to be lame. But I
Yes,
thought I'm going to try it anyway.
yes, yes.
So I did. And here's what I discovered.
Mm,
When one of the aspects of the workshop is that they read through a list of words that were typically masculine and words that were typically feminine, and they said, read through it, feel into it.
yes.
Which of those do you resonate with? Which not so much? And what I discovered is the masculine words, almost without exception, I really resonated with. I really valued. I thought, yeah, that's really great stuff. And a lot of the feminine words, I thought, eh, no, I don't value that so much. And in fact, some of them I even had disdain for. So that was my very first window into the balance, because what I learned, I really thought this was all about work-life balance.
Yes,
And
yes.
so my third and last burnout, from that, I learned that it wasn't for me about work-life balance. It was about how I was being was out of balance. So that feminine and masculine were completely out of whack.
So touch on that a little bit more. So when you say the masculine and feminine, I myself know, but that's because, that's my passion to research that a little bit further. For the listeners that's sitting at home, explain the feminine and the masculine within a person.
Sure. Well, we're talking about feminine and masculine energy, not male and female. First thing to know. Second thing to know, we each have both, and they're both good. They can both serve us, and we need both, right? They're a great balance to each other, the yin and the yang. And I knew about the yin and the yang, but yeah, it's a pretty thing. I had
Yeah.
I hadn't really gone into it all that deeply. So, there are lots of strength and masculine energy, the doing and taking action and the planning and all that stuff. It's great. My whole life was steeped in that, right? The masculine, I think people really have a good sense of. So let me talk more about the feminine. The feminine is very often people will associate words like nurturing and gentle, and sure, they are. And in fact, the language that we use to describe the feminine, I think, is very telling of where we are in society at any given time. And, even today, if you look in a dictionary, it will say words like mm, um, weak or pretty or sissy. And the truth is, the kind of words that truly embody feminine energy are words like truth and innovation and flexibility and adaptability and creativity. And there's so much strength in the feminine, but we have devalued it. And our society devalues it. It's funny. I was at my accountant's office last week, and it had been raining, and I noticed the water coming off the roof. And water is one of those soft, flexible things, very feminine. Mm-hmm. And it was falling, and this really tough, strong asphalt, it had carved a line right along the roof line in the ground. And that's the strength of water. So it's kind of a good example of the strength and power behind the feminine. It's just, we often don't explore that. And even, some of the workshops that I've held around power and the feminine, I've had people say all of their connotations, the way they thought about power was so negative. And at the end of it, they said, I didn't realize power could be a good thing.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting time period that we're in, because it really is a balancing factor that is happening right now as we speak. And that shift in consciousness, the shift in understanding, the shift in the divine feminine and the divine masculine is allowing for this conversation to take place, even in the corporate walls of society. So that's a beautiful thing. And so what you're doing is you're taking your work and your workshops and your speaking engagements, and you're starting to do the work of empowering and helping people understand that. Can you touch on, Adrienne, can you touch on the 5 principles that you spoke about earlier? You said that there's a 5-step process.
Well, yes, absolutely. And it doesn't always happen in this order, but the first thing is we do an inventory so that people can really get clear, because that clarity is really, really important when anytime when a person wants to move from where they are to where they want to be, right? So that clarity is super important. So we start there. Then we create an action plan, but not before we feel into it, right? Because that heart work that you do so beautifully.
Thank you.
It's a really important part of planning. So it's a great balance of the masculine and feminine energy in that. And then we look at developing the skills to support where they want to be. And a lot of times, those are really brain-friendly skills. I was stunned to learn that the way we as women work very often, that whole multitasking thing.
Yes.
That's really, really fast switching, because the prefrontal cortex can't actually multitask. So I was a supreme shifter. Yeah. So I'm going to call it multitasking, right? So, but what I learned is that can actually shrink part of our brain. And I was horrified. So I'm like, I'm on a mission to keep the brain of women alive and thriving. So developing those brain-friendly awarenesses and skills is part of it. And then the 4th step is optimizing the environment. There's so many different parts to it: the physical environment, the mental environment, the people that we surround ourselves with. Those are all really important things. And then the 5th one is to really master the mind and emotions. So that's part of the 5-step system.
Isn't that wonderful? And just because there may be some listener out there who doesn't quite understand the neuroscience, can you explain neuroscience? Because people understand biology, chemistry, physics. Now, what is this that you're speaking of?
Well, this is a very technical term: the cool way the brain works. Okay, so people often say, the brain is at the core of all we do. Well, okay, the brain and the heart, the heart's really at the core of it, but let's focus just on the brain, okay? It is responsible for very often the way we act, the way we respond, the way we react. And when you understand that, it improves your relationship with yourself, but even more, it helps you understand the people around you. If you're a leader and you have an understanding of the basic neuroscience, basic, like I'm not talking hard stuff,
Yes.
really, really basic things about the drivers. And so here's one example. The brain loves certainty. Now, you, the personality, may not, but the brain does, because it's taking care of a lot of business in your body, right? So that's just a tiny little nugget, but that's one of the pieces of learning, that when people understand that, they can integrate that into their life so that their brain doesn't get so tired, so that they can use their brain for the important, innovative kind of cool things that they really want to do, and not waste that brain power. So the brain uses an enormous amount of energy, right?
Yes.
We only have so much energy. This is why people get decision fatigue. So Steve Jobs, he always wore the same outfit.
Right.
Why? So that he could reduce the friction in his brain and not have to think about what he was going to wear. He could use that brain power in other ways.
Beautifully put, beautifully put. Now tell me, for some of the audience, they may be wondering, well, how do I take care of that special equipment that I have up there? What are some of the foods that you would suggest? What are some of the key elements that you feel that everybody needs to incorporate, knowing the understanding and how the brain works and functions, and how it can be in optimal shape? What do you have to offer?
A lot. Too much for this, but let me just touch on the high points. And I apologize in advance, because there's not one person on this listening to this podcast who hasn't heard this part before. So getting enough hydration, quality fats, because the brain is a lot of fat, right?
Yes.
So high quality fats, very important. Always increase your supply of healthy vegetables and good protein and movement. So here's an interesting thing. I told you that I was discovering all of this when I was in a really rough place, physically, mentally exhausted. I also have fibromyalgia. So to be truthful, I had difficulty moving. I was just a mess. And like a jellyfish on the beach is how I felt. And the more I was learning about the brain, I learned that movement, exercise, walking briskly, that actually helps build neurons. Those are cells that can go to the brain, right? And build brain cells. They're the focus of, or the foundation of brain cells. So movement's so important.
Yes.
And people would say exercise is important, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you know what? My knees are bad. I have fibromyalgia. Back up the truck, baby.
Yeah. Yeah.
But imagine how frustrating it is.
Yes.
You have your brain not working and you can't move much, and you find out the movement is one of the keys to helping your brain.
Yes.
So yes, best to learn that one before the brain takes a bit of a dive.
Isn't that something? Now, when that's, I guess, where the 10,000 steps or whatever they say that you should be having minimum a day or whatever, in whichever way or form. And I'm sure that having some nice fresh air would do you a world of good as well. Now, for yourself, because you've been through so much, my dear, and I know the entire story, how do you incorporate some of those things into your life?
Right. I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to keep talking about it. The
Yes.
mindfulness is really important for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is it slows things down. We get a barrage of information in every second of every day almost.
Mm-hmm.
And the brain has to work very hard sorting it out, what we want, what we don't want, what's important, what's not important. So anytime you can be mindful and take a brain break, that's a really important thing. So that's one of the things I do. And that can be as simple as there are so many different forms of breathing, but whichever one feels good for you. It can be as simple as stopping and touching your hands and just feeling the feeling on each hand as you do it. It's ridiculously simple, but it's focused and it gives your brain a bit of a break. So that's one of the other things I do. Meditation is really key. And again, there are so many different forms, but for me, it's just a question of quieting my mind. Easier said than done. Um, and I'll only do it for 15 minutes at a time and just to listen.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Great.
Yeah. So those are some of the things that I do.
How wonderful. Now, I know that you're very passionate and you had spoken to me in the past about, the signs of a heart attack for a woman are so different. And you said, please let me discuss this. And I was like fascinated. I said, oh, I didn't realize that signs of a heart attack for a woman could be different than a man. But I would love for you to share that because I think that's very valuable information for anyone that's out there listening.
Yeah. Well, I need to say, I've got a whole talk around this,
Yeah.
and we could have a whole other call, but I'll give you the Reader's Digest version, if that makes sense to people anymore these days.
Yeah.
Showing my age there a little bit. Um,
Don't worry, I was there as well.
so I was out for lunch,
Yes.
and I just didn't feel right. Those are the magic words, by the way. I just didn't feel right. And I was feeling suddenly nauseous. And I thought, wow, can you get the flu in a nanosecond?
Yeah.
I thought, that's so weird. And my friend said, hey, why don't we have a cup of tea? And I thought, that's a great idea because I'm half British. That fixes everything.
Yes.
So we had a cup of tea, and I did. I felt much better, much better. And then a little bit later, I felt sick to my stomach again. And my arms were so tired and heavy, as if, when you're working overhead and
Yes.
then your arms get really, so it was that kind of a feeling. And I thought, that's weird. And then lunch came. And for the first time in months, I had dairy and gluten.
Mm.
And it was so good. The dish was really lovely. And again, about a third of the way through, I felt sick to my stomach. And I thought, come on, can dairy and gluten really affect you that fast? Because I never had strong reactions. Anyway, my friend said, are you okay? And I said, I don't feel great. I don't feel right. And she said, well, your nail beds are kind of blue. I'm like, oh, okay. So we decided to get out of there and get some fresh air.
Yes.
And I was feeling really weak, kind of too weak to talk. And I said, you know what? I'm going to drive you back to the ferry and I'm going to pop into the local hospital. And then it turned out I couldn't drive. So she drove for me.
Oh,
And we
wow.
checked in and I got all of the, paraphernalia.
Yeah.
And it would come in about a wave. 5 minutes, I'd feel really crappy, but like not good at all.
Yeah.
And then I'd feel fine again. It's like, this is so strange. Anyway, I was feeling that really icky feeling for an extended period of time. And the doctor came up to me and he said, Miss White, it appears you're having a heart attack. I said, I'm so sorry. I don't think so. I've been swimming around so much in this bed. I think I've messed up your wires. He said, no, you're having a heart attack. It's like, oh. So if I had been home, truthfully, Cylindrin, I would have gone to bed. I would have
Wow.
thought, you know what? I don't feel great. I'm just going to lie down.
Yeah.
I certainly would not have gone to the hospital. Um, and I had 100% blockage. And I had an 80% and another 80% and a 70%. Like, it wasn't good.
No.
I won the genetic lottery, but I remembered my mom had a heart attack when she was 50. And I remember her saying, I just didn't feel right. And her husband said, we're going to the hospital.
Wow.
So, yeah. So people assume it's this great big event where you have wild chest pains and shooting pain down the left arm. And it wasn't that way for me at all. And in fact, I volunteer at a cardiac hospital on the wing and talk to people who are just about to have surgery or are a few days out from open heart surgery. And, you know, a lot of people that I talk to have the same experience, sometimes a little bit of pressure in the neck, but the
Mhm.
tiniest little bit of pressure, just something unusual, you know,
Wow.
not concerning necessarily, just
Mhm.
anyway.
Mhm.
So sometimes men experience that, but largely that's the female experience. And here's the problem. Our media, movies, television, everything focuses on what is typically a more male, not masculine, male experience. Most of the research is focused on men because women have those, you know, pesky hormones.
Mm.
Yeah. So, yeah, as a
Interesting.
result, 53% of Canadian women,
Yes.
54% of American women who go and report heart attack symptoms to a medical professional are misdiagnosed. And they
Ooh.
often die. Yeah.
So your advice would be then to go straight to the hospital. Don't go to a doctor because they'll do the actual, the a complete checkup.
Yeah, really pay attention.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you've got a really good doctor, do that. Um, but it's just pay attention to your body, and it's something we don't do. And this, dear one, comes around so beautifully.
Hmm. Hmm.
The When we were talking about the feminine
Yes.
and how our society and our language and
Yes.
our definitions frequently don't value the feminine.
Yes.
We come to that on our own too, and we often devalue ourselves.
Isn't that something? Yeah,
Yeah,
I could so totally tell where, your importance is of whoever the male is or whatever is. Sometimes it's not even the male, but it's everybody else or everything else. And yeah, I could see that happening
right.
because it is something that you're conditioned with. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And so the one of the huge learning opportunities for me here was not just about the masculine and feminine and realizing it was out of whack and learning how to um, lean in more to the feminine energy within me, but
Yes.
also to value that more. And as a result, because I'm female, valuing myself more. And
Right.
that makes such an enormous difference. And, you know, I've talked to friends of mine who are forensic anthropologists. So they know way back stuff, right?
Yes.
I don't. And I called one of my friends and I said, you know, this, it doesn't make sense to me. I have a belief and I need you to tell me if I'm right. She said, go for it. I
Yes.
said, I think early mankind, when we were cave dwelling, when we were nomadic, I do not believe for a second that the females in that group devalued themselves, because if they did, and if they didn't take care of themselves, they would have died. They all would have died.
Hmm. Hmm.
And she said, you're absolutely right. She said, the research that I've done and what we've seen out there, um, people valued themselves because they were people and, you know, they did their part. And I said, so when did it go pear-shaped? When did it start to go wrong? And she said, it seems to be around the time of agriculture, which is interesting because then the nomadic part stopped because they could grow their own food. right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's just, I say that just
Mm-hmm.
to point out
Mm-hmm.
that while in recent history, this is a problem, this
Yes.
is something we've developed and perpetuated, but it's not the way we started.
No, no. And I know that you also, well, both of us have spoken at length about taking care of yourself, and I know you made a comment. You said, well, it's not being selfish.
Mm. Mhm.
So if you want to touch on that, just so that the listeners understand that there is this thought process out there where people think that, if you don't go to work, if you don't do whatever it is that's necessary, that you're being selfish.
Yes. Oh, so then you're picking all of my favorite soapboxes, dear one. Well, let's talk about selfish. I think I am not the only woman who grew up to be told it is wrong to be selfish. And if you put your needs ahead of someone else, you are selfish.
Yes.
And that there was so much shame in that. We didn't want to be selfish.
Yes.
And it also means you're thoughtless. Oh, I learned so much about what it means,
Yeah.
right?
The
So,
guilt and the shame behind it, the empowerment that you have to face. But again, you think about it. I look at my mother and I think to myself, well, she's definitely not one that was selfish, because she would be on her crutches trying to prepare a meal. I, I could never imagine me doing that. I'd say, go get takeout. This isn't happening.
love that. I've got to tell you. So, one of the women I talked to, she had just had open heart surgery 3 days later. Her sternum was literally held together with wire. And she said, I'm looking forward to getting back to my routine. And I just had a funny feeling. And I said, okay, tell me more about that.
Yes.
Well, she said, I can vacuum, right? I said, no, gracious woman, you need to take care of yourself. You
Yeah.
actually need to let people help you. And I've learned that asking for help and allowing people to help you, for
Yes.
men and women, that is harder than recovering from open heart surgery for a lot of people.
Why do you feel that that is? Why is it that people find that very difficult?
Well, we're fiercely independent for starters.
Ah, yes.
I think from the male perspective, from the men that I've talked to, they're sort of in that provider role. They're accustomed to taking care of things. To have a need that you can't fulfill is to be weak. I think that's what they think, right?
Oh, oh
So
yeah.
I don't envy them. They're in a lousy spot.
Yeah.
And others have really evolved to the point where they understand it's just part of the process. For women, we tend to be such caregivers, right? Your mom on crutches is a great example, that at our own detriment, because we have been taught it's selfish to take care of yourself,
Yes.
to our own detriment, we will take care of the needs of our children and the other people in our lives. Which, if we end up dead, doesn't really serve anybody,
Anybody. That's
you
right.
know?
That's
And
right. That's
it's
right.
a really tough thing. Also, people
Yeah.
don't necessarily plan,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a big thing.
Yeah.
So, if you've got something coming up, ask people to help. And I'm sure you've experienced this at some point. You're going through something and somebody says, oh, if I can help, just let me know. Well, sometimes they don't mean it, but you know what? They usually do, but they don't know what you need.
That's right. It
So,
it seems like it's a passing comment, and it's just them, putting it out there, but not really coming from a place of "I'll be here."
right. At least that's the story we make up.
That's right.
And it's not always true. They don't want to be a bother quite often, right? And that's where this clarity part part one of that 5-step system comes in. The clarity is so important. So like if you're having open heart surgery and people say, oh, if you need any help, let me know. The answer is, I do, thank you. I'll need help with rides to doctor's appointments because I can't drive for over a month. And I can't make the bed because I can't put that kind of pressure. So that would be helpful. Meals would be helpful. Shopping would be helpful. And if you can't, then if you could think uplifting, happy thoughts for me, that would be great
Yeah,
too.
great, great. I want to back up just a little bit, Adrienne, and I want to take you back to the male female um, stereotypical thought process. Now, this brings me to a very interesting point in our conversation, and that is we have many females out there who are in the corporate world who are trying to prove for whatever reason that they are just as good, if not better. And I know that you would not be offended if I were to ask you this question. Um, that's a very difficult position to be in. In other words, you're in a female's body and you're trying to do things which are very, in my viewpoint, and I'm not being judgmental, living the life of a male to a certain degree. How does that work when all of a sudden, okay, you can't ask for help, you can't do these things? Like, touch on that for our audience, because that to me is a real complex and very confusing subject, in corporate society here, the female, you can't ask for help if you're a male, but how does that work when you're a female? Like,
yeah. I've got to touch on, I was talking to a woman who worked with Obama and in the States, and she's a lawyer. And I asked her, have you noticed a shift in women behaving like men in the workplace? Have you noticed any kind of a shift? And she said, absolutely. Because when we started to get into high-level positions,
yes,
the only way we could fit in was to go in like a man.
wow,
And so we've noticed that, right? Men are interpreted as being strong decision makers. They're tough, they get the job done. A woman doing the same thing is considered a ball-busting bitch, pardon my language.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So, but that's what women very often, I don't like to generalize too deeply,
yes,
but very often that's what women had to do to have a place in senior management levels. So for myself, it was very, I'll say, insidious or subtle.
mm-hmm.
Most of the people in senior management were men, and I just thought they were wonderful. So I learned from them, but I
Nice.
learned the way of the man from them.
Right.
So sometimes it's just not having that role model there to learn from. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And certainly I learned, as many women do, that how you are will not work in this environment. Now that's changing, and I love that, and I'm so grateful for it, and I'm so excited that we get to see it and be part of it. We're not there yet, but we're closer. So in terms of asking questions, because that was your question,
Yes.
we learn to do it in ways that uplift another without making ourselves look too stupid. But I think more and more, and I'm so grateful for this, our society is valuing vulnerability and that strength and capacity to say, I'm not sure I get this. Can you explain that a different way? I was talking to a fellow who was just about to have open heart surgery last week.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to him about the ask and allow. And I said, you will need to ask people for help and you're going to need to allow them. But I think you're brave enough to do it. And you could see that just washed over him. That was language that worked for him.
That's right.
Because it is brave. It's very brave to ask.
That's right.
And
Be
you
in a
also
state
know,
of vulnerability. That's right. That's a huge thing. It's you know, especially for a very, very male, macho guy, they do not like the feeling of vulnerability because they're really opening up themselves for
yeah,
all sorts of things, yes, it is uncomfortable, unfamiliar. You don't know what's gonna come next. So what I always say, I say that someone who's a real macho guy who can easily go into that vulnerable position is really, really an individual. I think that there's that element of charisma there because he's being his authentic self.
mm. Well, I love that. And, you know, the aspects of the feminine that I so deeply value and appreciate are that when you're able to step into the feminine, whether you're male or female, doesn't matter,
Yes.
you open to exploration, you open to curiosity, you open to reflection, and you open to transformation. And I love
That's true.
that about the
Yeah.
feminine.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, is there a way that you can explain that, you know, to make the process of trauma or surgery or any big, huge thing that happens in life? You know, there's certain things that I know that you bring to the table from your practice of coaching and everything else that you bring to the table that makes it easier. I know that you had expressed that there's certain keys that make the process easier for, you know, bringing on the big trauma and handling that or big surgery or something, which is, you know, huge. Can you explain that a little bit, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I started already with the allow and ask. But the I usually use an acronym, ABLE. And then I thought, you know what? I'm missing something. So now it's cable, but it doesn't quite sound as good. But the C stands for clarity.
Yes.
Really, really understanding what you need. The A stands for ask and allow. The B is because when it's major surgery, you need to be on the lookout for stuff that's going on that may or may not be related and keep a list. The L stands for look at your progress from the day of surgery. I've talked to people who struggle so deeply because they say, you know, 2 weeks ago I could run up and down stairs and now I can't even do, it's hard to get out of bed. It's like, dude, you just had your sternum cut. It's
Yeah.
wired together. Of course it is. So that, and then the E is ensure. Ensure the people around you feel appreciated and get a break. Because when we have major surgery like that, it's all about us and it needs to be all about us.
Yes.
But especially when it's a long-term thing, the caregivers will not give themselves a break
Yeah.
very often because they're so focused on you. So it's that. But there's another thing too. So that's the cable
Yeah.
acronym that I use with people. But the other thing is um, very often when I talk to my friends and family about what was coming up, like,
Yes.
ah, surprise, major surgery upcoming.
Yeah.
I didn't want anybody to say, oh, poor Adrienne,
Oh, yes.
right?
That, oh,
Mm, I
mm,
did
mm,
not
mm.
want that energy. So
Yeah.
I said, you know what would mean the world to me is when you think of me, I want you to think of me strong and flourishing and healing with ease. And they did. And honestly, I could feel it. I could absolutely feel it. And it made all the difference. I still say they saved my life.
Isn't that wonderful? And that's amazing. The journey, the lessons that you've brought here today, it's been absolutely incredible. Now, is there something that you want to share with us? Because there's many people, I'm sure, out there that want to reach out and say, Adrienne, how can I get a hold of you? Maybe I want to come in for a healing session, a coaching session, whatever it may be. How can someone get a hold of you, Adrienne?
Well, they can email me, and probably the easiest email is relief@leaderslanding.com. Relief@leaderslanding.com. But I'd like to offer your listeners something special. May I do that?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. Well, only for the listeners of Uplifting Humans, I'd like to offer a 20% discount on coaching packages and workshops this year. And if the listeners will, because this is a fairly new podcast, and we want to get the word out, and the way to do that is to make sure people are rating this, let people know if you got value out of it. So if you take the time to rate this podcast and let me know in your email, and I'll give you a 40% discount this year, so that we can really support the great work that you, Cylindrin, are doing. So there's that. So whether it's thriving through burnout or the power of the feminine, the programs and coaching that I have going on this year, I would love to hear from you. And even if you just have questions, send me an email, relief@leaderslanding.com.
Just wonderful. Thank you so much, Adrienne. It's been a pleasure. I'm sure we're going to have you back again. You have lots to share. You're just a wealth of knowledge. And on behalf of the audience, thank you so much. Until next time, I'm Cylindrin Buller, your host from Uplifting Humans, where we engage the world with real stories and expert advice. Please share, rate, tune in, and we'll have Adrienne back again. We have incredible speakers and real stories that you can learn from, and share that with your friends. And of course, you can go to upliftinghumans.com, and all of the episodes are there. Thank you so much. And on that note,